Bentornati, and welcome back to Dwarf Fortress for Beginners. In this series, we look at the in-game tutorials and help text and try to figure out how to play this game as a beginner, starting from zero. I'm personally not a beginner. I've been playing this game for roughly 10 years, but I, at this point, have 6 hours in the premium version, so I'm still learning some of the new UI things. In the first episode, I followed the in-game tutorial as linearly as humanly possible, which means that I also skipped on interacting with a lot of things in the UI that I would have normally used. In this episode, I'm gonna give you a few useful tips, and I'm gonna open all the dialogues that are on screen because many of them have a very useful help text the first time you open them. So, tip number 1. Actually, I want to call this tip number 0. This is the most important one. Remember that this game actually existed since 2006. There is a lot of material online that refers to previous versions. Watch out for videos and guides that are not meant for the premium version. Premium version came out the 6th of December 2022. Nobody had access to this version previous to this date. With that out of the way, tip number 1 for new fortresses. Since, like me, you probably have started with the tutorial, and the tutorial embarks you on a map tile that has a lot of trees and also instructs you to build a stairway underground, most probably, like me, you made a mistake that was not pointed out in the tutorial. So if we go down, you can see that I've dug partially in stone and partially in soil, just one elevation step below the surface. Now, what's the problem with that? When you dig just below the surface and there's trees up above, you may encounter the tree roots. If you look in here close to the river, let's actually zoom in a little bit. You can see that some of these tiles are slightly different. This is damp sandy loam. This is willow roots. That's because this is a willow trunk, this is a willow tree, right? Underneath, there's a root system. While digging, if you dig out all the tiles that have the roots of a tree, that tree will collapse on its own. But not only it will leave wood, but it will leave a hole in the ground. If you look in here, you can clearly see that when I mouse over, it says open space instead of soil or grass or shale or something like that. But also I can see downstairs, I can see this shale mug from above. Another useful way to catch little holes in your fortress like this is bringing the camera up in elevation. If you go up enough, at some point, this hole will become evident when the engine stops rendering that tile because it's too far away. So how do we fix a mistake like this? Well, I'm probably gonna fix it at some point during the video when I open the relevant window. Isn't that convenient for me? Alright, with tip number 0 and 1 out of the way, let's now focus on the main dish, which is the UI, all the elements of the UI that I didn't look at in the previous episode. Starting from the top. In here we have Rakustral, Tomb Silver, an outpost. This is the name of our fortress in Dwarf, and the name of our fortress in plain English, and the current status, which is an outpost. In the future, this may become a barony or the mountain home. The window underneath, it's trying to list created wealth, which means the total value of the stuff that we made in here, but it's also telling us you need a broker with the appraisal skill. So you actually need a dwarf appointed to the noble profession of being a broker, and they need to exercise their appraisal skill in order to fill in this piece of information. Then we can see a recap of our population. We have 7 dwarves, very appropriate, and their general mood level. Let's skip the stocks. I'm gonna come back to this in a second. We have food, drinks, seed, meat, fish, plants, and other. As you might have noticed, there's this tilde symbol near all of these numbers, and it just so happens that we have very round numbers, like 50, 40, or 10. Why is that? Well, the reason will be apparent as soon as I open the stocks. So let's do that. Stocks. Here you can see every item in the fortress. Click on the category headings to collapse and expand them. If you don't have a bookkeeper, or they don't have an office to work in, numbers may be approximate. Don't show this again. That's right. These numbers are approximate, and some of the numbers in here are also approximate, like bags, roughly 10, because we do not have currently a dwarf appointed again to the noble assignment of being a bookkeeper that could make the inventory of this fortress. So the game doesn't straight up tell you. You are supposed to be the collective conscience of the dwarves, but if the dwarves don't have a person specifically assigned to bookkeeping, they themselves don't know exactly how much meat or seeds or drinks they have. They know that they have a bunch. They know that they have roughly 50 drinks around. They never counted. So at some point we will assign a bookkeeper, a broker, a manager. These are all very important dwarven professions that actually unlock important pieces of the UI for us. So let's say okay for now. Let's explore this for a second. Some of these, when the numbers are really low, actually 7 or below, we know exactly the number. So anvils, we have 1. For this anvil, we can go exactly to the place where it is. So the tooltip says leave the menu and recenter the view on the item. We can get on the item information sheet. We can set this to toggle as forbidden. Forbidden means dwarves will never touch it. We can set it to dump. Dump means the dwarves will take it to the nearest designated trash zone. If you don't have a trash zone, dumping does nothing. You can toggle it to be melted at a smelter. We currently don't have a smelter, so it would not have any function. And then you can toggle the visibility of this item. Toggling the visibility means that you would not see it on the map anymore. However, the item is still there. This might be especially useful for stone boulders. A lot of people don't like seeing stone boulders or these logs lying all over the place. The reason is you will always have a lot of stone boulders because as you keep expanding, of course you leave that stone behind. That stone is useful to you because you can turn it into crafts and stuff like that. But some people just don't like the look of it. You can search in here. For example, if I want to know, okay, barrels. We know that we have roughly 20. We have the actual list of all the items. So if you wanted, you could count them yourself. And just like for everything else, you can do this and look at all the details. Or you can go back in the stock and, for example, say, well, where are my beds? Okay, this is interesting. This number is in orange. That means that these beds are actually constructed. So if I click in here to recenter on them, these items are now part as a building. They have been built through the building menu. All right, that was the stocks window. Just to mention, in here we have the current date. We know that it's late spring. We know that it's currently the year 100. The phase of the moon. The phase of the moon is actually important in a game where there's were-beasts, like werewolves or were-cats or were-elephants. You never know. Also, the season is very useful to know when certain civilizations' caravans may arrive to trade. Then if we look in here, we have the pause button, the play button, settings. This button lets us access the other guides that will be the subject of future episodes. The minimap, an actually very useful thing that you can do on the minimap is click to quickly jump around. Shows you the elevation, shows you what you're looking at right now. Then in these buttons, we already know about the recenter on the surface button. So if I go downstairs and then I click on this, brings me back to the surface. There's a few more things in here. This plus and minus are zoom. This hash symbol, it's useful in that it shows the amount of water occupying a tile in the map using a numerical value. Right now it's not showing anything because we are looking at this water from above. If I go to one elevation step below though, now you can see that I'm looking at tiles that are full of water. These numbers go from 0 to 7. 0 means no liquid, 7 means this entire tile is full to the brim with river water. And if I toggle this, I don't see it anymore. This is true both for water and magma, which are currently the only types of liquids that the game handles. This button in here shows up and down arrows over ramps at the current elevation. So let's click on the map right here so that we are looking at a small valley in the hills. If I click on this, this is now clearly showing that all these ramps are going up from these levels on the hill. If I go one elevation step up, now I can see the difference between ramps that go down and ramps that go up. If I click it again, it goes away. Using the F1 hotkey, I can go back to the wagon. This button here recenters on the deepest discovered area at this location. So if I click on this, it's now getting me to my bed chambers, because that's the deepest I dug in this fortress at the moment. And I can click back on this, and I go back to the surface. This one that I've skipped is the hotkeys. It's slightly more complex. If I click on this, I get a full list of all the currently assigned hotkeys. The F1 that I mentioned just a second ago, it's not a default. You can actually change this. Right now is named wagon arrival location. Let's actually create a second one. Going in here, let's click on this. Set this entry to recenter on the current view. And it says elevation 37 in the position, and we can change the name and call it workshops. If I exit this and go, I don't know, somewhere else, now I can press F2 to get exactly there. Now let's take a look at the bottom of the screen from left to right. There is a lot in here. The first button opens the citizen information menu. You can also access it with the U hotkey. This actually opens a very complex window that has many nested tabs. It starts from creatures. Creatures has citizens, pets and livestock, which is basically all your animals. Others, which includes wild animals and visitors, also enemies, and then dead or missing. So for example, if one of your creatures, one of your animals or one of your dwarves died, unfortunately, you will see where the body is in this tab. Back to the citizens for a second. In here you have all the options to recenter, to look at the details. You can see their current occupations. So in here you can quickly see if your people are busy or if maybe you can designate some more jobs. You also have the option to access some shortcuts related to the current task. For example, our dwarf Bim is currently working on cutting gems. This button here tells us that this job is a infinite repeat job. It means that the dwarves will continue working on this until they, for example, run out of gems to cut. From here, we could quickly set it to pause or suspend or entirely remove this task. In here we can again also see what the mood of our dwarves is, and you can quickly sort the dwarves based on mood. This is especially useful if you are trying to bring the mood up in the fortress. You may want to address the dwarves that are more unhappy first. Let's skip on this column for now because it relates to the labor tab. Then from creatures, we can switch to tasks, which is the same than opening the menu from this icon here. So, as you can see, these buttons are basically just shortcuts to open each one of these tabs. So the tasks tab is really similar to the citizens tab. It's just seen from the point of view of the actual task, and we get a little bit more information about that. For example, we can see again cut gems. We can see that Bim is working on it. More than that, we can see where this task is centered, which is the jeweler workshop, and we can recenter on the jeweler's workshop from here. Next up, we have Place Information menu. From here we go to Places. Places are basically all the locations that have some meaning in your fortress. There might be zones that you have created, and rooms fall in the category of zones. Could be locations. Locations are more complex areas, like for example an hospital or a tavern that may encompass more than one room. The stockpiles are listed in here, so we can see our stockpile number 1 and our wood stockpile on the surface. We can also clearly see that they are 100% occupied. You can see a list of all the workshops with, again, a list of the tasks that are going on in there. So this cut gems task is still here listed. And then your farm plots. We do not currently have any farm plot. Next up, one of the most important UI elements in the game, the labor menu. The guide says, work details are one way you can control which workers do which tasks, and they are the only way to assign certain tasks like mining, woodcutting, hunting, and fishing. Generally, almost every task will be available for every citizen, but you can both restrict both citizens and tasks. Citizens are restricted by using their specialization button. Tasks are restricted by setting their work detail to only selected do this. If a task does not have a default work detail, you can create a custom work detail. Once you assign citizens to the task, you can then set only selected do this if you want to restrict it. Okay, there is a lot to unpack in here. Let me check on this and let me try to explain this. However, this screen and the management of work details might need an entire episode. To begin with, there are a lot of different tasks in this game, so a lot of different separate activities. In order to show you, I have to click on Add New Work Detail just to show you the list. I'm not gonna create a new work detail though. So these are all the separate types of activities that a dwarf might be enabled or disabled to do. Might be allowed or not to do. For example, cleaning, lever operation, road building, and wall or floor construction are all separate jobs, but also item hauling or wood hauling or stone hauling are separate jobs and they can be handled separately. Another example could be in the woodworking category, there's carpentry, but also crossbow making as a separate job. The guide tells us that most of those activities are available for all dwarves. This means that unless otherwise stated, every dwarf can do any of those things if they feel like it. On top of this, we have default work details. A work detail is a collection of one or more of those single tasks. It doesn't seem like there's a way to access the list of tasks corresponding to the default work details, which led me to believe them to contain only one. So mining could very well just be only mining. Now let's look at this option. Only selected dwarves can do this. This means that mining as a task escapes the general rule that says that all dwarves can do any job. So at the moment only Ether can mine, because he is currently the only one selected. If I click on this, now nobody is selected. It means that nobody can mine now. For some work details, you cannot click on everybody does this. If you were able to do this, it would actually count as everybody is selected by default. You can, however, click on nobody does this as a quick way to say, everybody stop mining. Whoever you are, wherever you are, stop mining. Nobody does this. Okay, let's switch back to only selected do this and select our miner once again. Planters is slightly different in that it can be set to everybody does this. So at the moment, if we had a farm, all the dwarves would be able to go in the farm and plant crops. If we wanted though, we could click on only selected do this, check Tozid, which seems to be a proficient planter, and ensure that only the best dwarf is assigned to this job. By the way, you can select multiple dwarves for any work detail if you want. In the case of the planter though, it's actually a good idea to have only a selected few dwarves work at it, because that way they will build their skills and get better and better, which in turn means higher return on your crops. Fisher dwarves. Only selected do this, and we have one fisher. I would actually want to pause this for a while, because I've noticed that we have a lot of fish that we are not even able to store at the moment. So let's click on nobody does this, which turns this red. This means that at the moment, it doesn't matter if you are assigned to fishing or not, I don't want nobody to fish. And then we have plant gatherers, we have stone cutters, engravers, and so on and so forth. All of these are now set to everybody does this. A good example is hauling. Hauling governs moving items around. If you notice that all your dwarves are spending a lot of time just moving items around, where you might have instead wanted some of your dwarves to work on specific tasks and not be concerned with moving heavy boulders to the random stockpile number 36, you could say only selected do this, and maybe only select the dwarves that are not currently assigned to anything else. Let's undo this for now, I don't have that need specifically at the moment. There is much else that we could say in here. For example, there's this entire other option of saying that a dwarf is specialized. I'm not gonna get into detail with that, and I'm not gonna get into detail of how you create more work details. It can get very complicated, and we would definitely need an entire episode on this specifically. Next tab, standing orders. You can view this tab as a collection of notable exceptions to what would normally be handled through work details. There are a few that I would like to customize in here based on my own preferences. For example, automatically weave all thread means that if you have a loom workshop, that workshop would automatically create tasks to transform thread into cloth. I don't want that, I want to control that manually. Automatically collect webs. I would like to turn that off so that my dwarves don't go out collecting, I don't know, giant cave spider silk webs without me knowing and end up being eaten by said giant cave spider. Others are actually very useful and don't pose any major risk for the fortress, like automatically slaughter animals that you marked as ready to be slaughtered, or automatically butcher available carcasses and stuff like that. Then there's more options for refuse and dumping, and then sieges and how certain items are forbidden specifically during sieges, and chores and others, and we are getting really deep in the details of this game. Let's not get confused right now, let's skip on all this, we are getting really in the weeds. So let's get to another very important tab, the kitchen tab. From here you can see a recap of all the edible items in your fortress, and you can set up specific permissions for your brewers and cooks. Under vegetables, fruit and leaves specifically, you will find all the kind of items that can be brewed, which means can be turned into booze, which is extremely critical for a dwarven fortress. One thing that I want to do right now in here is disallow my cook, which I don't have one at the moment, but for the future, I want to disallow them to create meals out of plump helmets, because plump helmets need to be my primary source of alcohol. Moving on, seeds. This just shows us all the different seeds that we have in the fortress at the moment. We have 5 of most of the dwarven crops, and then a little more of the plump helmet spawn that is used to create those plump helmets that make delicious dwarven beer. Then drinks. I would like to point out that it's a good idea to forbid the use of alcohol in the making of meals. While it may be delicious to add a dwarven ale to a more complex recipe, the dwarves would not get the necessary inebriation from that meal. Dwarven ale and beer are better drunk than eaten. Then we have meat, fish and others. There is absolutely no drawback to preparing meals with this stuff. Lastly, we have stone use. This is mostly pretty advanced stuff, like for example, which kind of stones can be used to make what. For example, let's see, chalk is not magma safe. It means it would get destroyed when submerged in magma. However, if I click on it, I can see that chalk can be used to make steel and pig iron bars. Anyway, let's not spend too much time in here. Okay, this ends our perusal of the labor tab that has many sub-tabs. Moving on, the work orders menu. Work orders are used to automate tasks in the workshops. These work orders are set to complete a certain number of tasks and can be given start conditions. For instance, you can create an order to make wooden bins if you are out of empty ones, to make drinks if you are running low, or to make 5 statues every month. You can limit work orders to a number of workshops. You can also create work orders at specific workshops from their building sheet. The system is reasonably powerful and you can eventually automate almost all of your production, if you wish. I'm not gonna check don't show this again, because we currently cannot even use this. It says a manager is required to coordinate work orders. Yes, you need to assign a dwarf to be a manager before you can even use this feature. So let's leave it for one of the next episodes. Next up, nobles and administrators. Here you can view your nobles, as well as assign your administrators, military leaders, and other officials. Militia commanders are assigned here. Once the first leader is assigned, subsequent captain positions will appear. This can also be assigned from the squad menu. Certain important functions in your fortress can only be performed by assigned administrators, such as the manager and bookkeeper. Once they are assigned, you can create work orders, run a hospital, and count and appraise your hoard. Nobles and certain administrators require rooms, and some may also make demands. Don't show this again. Okay. Members of the nobility have required rooms and can make demands. They cannot be reassigned. Administrators handle various aspects of your fortress and can be reassigned. Many administrators also require rooms. Okay, we currently have only one assigned position, which is the one of expedition leader. What happens if I click on here? I can actually reassign the expedition leader. I'm not gonna do that though, because it seems like Sodal has a lot of skills that are very useful in this assignment. By the way, one thing that I failed to point out is that in many of these tabs, your dwarves will be sorted in such a way to bring up the dwarf that is best suited for a specific job. You can leave this position vacant, but keep in mind that your citizens get a morale boost from complaining to the expedition leader, so it's actually beneficial to have one. Unfortunately, I don't get a tooltip that would tell me specifically what the expedition leader does. I get one for the manager that we already know about. The chief medical dwarf allows you to see the overall health of dwarves in your fortress. The broker uses their appraisal skill to allow you to see the value of items in the fortress. They're also the default negotiator when with visiting merchants. The bookkeeper keeps an accurate count of items in the fortress. And the messenger. Unfortunately, also the messenger doesn't have a tooltip, and it says in here that it's also new to this version of Dwarf Fortress. With this icon here, we have yet another very new feature with this version, which is assign a symbol of the position as a leader so that they can hold or carry that thing and signify their position. So I'm actually going to do that because this is pretty interesting. So Sodal is our expedition leader. I'm going to assign to them this copper pick. I think this is really fitting. This copper pick is going to be the symbol of our expedition leader. Then I'm asked to name the symbol. This is the screen that appears every time you are asked to give a specific name to something. A name, in this case, is not just something that you can write yourself, but it's the combination of specific terms and in a specific grammar that then gets translated in the Dwarven language. If we don't get in the weed of all of this right now, we can just click on random a few times and get something like Handle jumped, the golden neutrality, or Rhymesmith. Oh, right. I mean, Rhymesmith would be good for a performer. Youthful Orb, the Renown of Rags. I like this one. Stopped Constructs, Tozedaban. I think it's fitting, because this expedition leader could actually say with this, stop constructing this, right? So, this copper pick is now named Stopped Construct, and is the symbol of the expedition leader. Done. These icons here would show you if this person has some requirements. For example, when I hover over these icons for the expedition leader, it currently says no study, no quarters, no dining room, no tomb. Now, if this person were to actually require one of these to properly function or to be happy, to be satisfied with their station, these icons would light up, and up there would say needs meager quarters or needs decent office or something like that. As an example, I think I'm going to assign right now a bookkeeper. So let's add a bookkeeper. We can see that Tozid, the planter, gets first place in here because she's already a proficient record keeper, so let's select her. And we can see that she needs a study. She currently has no study, but needs a meager study. A bookkeeper also has more settings, which is what is the required accuracy of the counts. More accuracy takes more time. 5 in this case means the highest possible degree of precision, so all counts accurate. I don't think there is any specific drawback into setting this to something slightly less accurate. For example, setting it to 2 in this case would mean that we would only get accurate to the first 2 digits. So anything between 0 and 99 would be absolutely accurate, but then over 100, only the first 2 digits. So 110 is accurate, but you wouldn't get 112. I think this is good enough, probably. And if it saves time to this dwarf, I think it's actually good. Enough about this bookkeeper. We will get back to the bookkeeper towards the end of the episode and actually create a study for them to actually work on this. Next tab is the objects. It's got subtabs like artifacts. There aren't any crafted artifacts here. Your workers will rarely make them on their own. You may also send a squad to obtain one, so you can steal an artifact. You can recover an artifact that was stolen from you, but that happens on the World tab, and it's a totally different thing. Then you have symbols. We currently have the symbol that we just created, so that random copper pick that we named Tosetaban Stopped Constructs is the symbol of the expedition leader and now has this elevated status as an object. We have other named objects. Dwarves may name an object they get very attached to. This usually happens for military dwarves and their weapons. And then there is written content. There is no written content here. Prepare writing material and assign scholars to a library. Writing materials include paper and parchment sheets. Use these to make scrolls and quires. Libraries are a location that can be created at a zone. Again, this is more advanced stuff. You can have libraries and scholars and stuff like that, and you can create books and scrolls, and people that feel inclined and have accumulated a lot of knowledge can sit down and write a book or a scroll, and that becomes both a very valuable artifact level item in your fortress, but also attracts visitors from the outside, other scholars that might want to come in and read. And that's it for the Objects tab. The last of these groups of icon is the Justice menu. Let's just read on this. If you have a law enforcement administrator like a sheriff or a captain of the guard, witnesses of crimes will make reports, which find their way here. Certain crimes are indicative of larger problems, so you should pay attention to them, and affected victims and family members get upset if crime is ignored. It's up to you to choose whom to convict. All available witness information is presented for each case. You can also interrogate suspects. This is particularly important for schemes where the witnesses might not have the full story. It is recommended to place a certain number of cages and chains and assign them to a dungeon zone. Officers may opt for physical punishment if they cannot carry out custodial sentences. There is a lot to unpack in here, and this is practically kind of a game inside the game. Anyway, let's not spend too much time on this for the moment. This is usually not a huge problem very early in the life of your fortress. Alright, we are most of the way there. Then we have some things that we already know. We have digging. There is still a lot that could be said about digging, especially because there's an entire part of the options in here that is normally hidden. But this, again, would probably require an entire episode to explain. So let's hide that from now and move on. Chop trees. This is something, again, that we have done during the main tutorial, so we know already. Plant gathering. This is something that we did not try, so let's try some plant gathering. This works the same way as tree chopping, but it works on these little plants dotting the landscape. So if I click in here and open a rectangle like this, you can see that some icons for plant gathering have appeared, which means that these plants are actually harvestable right now. Plants may be something that you harvest once and they disappear, or it may be something that you only harvest the fruits or part of the roots of, and the actual plant stays there to mature more, produce later. So if I unpause, somebody that has the plants, or actually a lot of dwarves are doing that. Let me come back to this concept. If I go back to labors, you can see that there is a plant gatherer's work detail, but it says everybody does this. If I wanted, I could say that, for example, only Tozid and only Ilral will do this. Let's see what happens if I unpause now. Dwarves will continue carry out the current task, but they will not come back again. Let's look at this. So some of the dwarves that were previously gathering plants now have finished that task, and only Tozid and Ilral are now gathering plants. Let's actually revert this and say everybody does this, so that everybody has a chance to get in there and gather plants when needed. Gathering plants is especially useful should you remain, for some reason, without food. All these plants that we gathered could be used either as ingredients in meals or for brewing. If we look back at labors and in the kitchen, we can now see that we have some bitter vetch leaves that can be used only in the preparation of meals. We have some fisher berries that can be used both in meals and brews, prickleberries, purple amaranth leaves, and purple amaranths. So that is the gathering of plants. Next up we have wall smoothing, engraving, track engraving, and fortifications. Let's actually look at one of the simplest options in here, which is wall smoothing. So if we click on this and again designate a small area, like for example this small corridor, and unpause, we will see some of the dwarves stream down and start smoothing the stone. Stone smoothing takes quite a long time. It's actually a good idea to only assign this to a small amount of dwarves so that they can increase their skill in stone carving and smoothing, because the more skilled they are, the faster they go. Smoothing stone, both the floors and walls, makes your rooms more beautiful and has an impact on the mood of your dwarves. So watch out for the places where your dwarves spend a lot of time and make sure that those places are pretty, because that would make your dwarves much happier. Next up, we have remove mining, wood cutting, plant gathering, and smoothing orders. So let's say that we had designated all of this to be smoothed, but now we're thinking, well, that's a lot of work. I don't really want my people to do that, we can come in here and we can remove maybe a portion of this. We can use the paint option to remove only certain areas by clicking with the mouse, or click and drag actually also works, or draw a rectangle and remove the entire thing. Next up is the building. We used this in the first episode during the normal tutorial. This has multiple tabs. I will leave it to you to explore all the different options in here. Some options of note are, of course, doors and hatches, doors to restrict passage horizontally, hatches to restrict passage vertically and specifically going down. Under furnishes, you have beds, chairs, and tables that are, of course, very useful. Under constructions, you have an option to build stairs should you lack solid stone to carve into stairs. Under machines and fluids, there's an option to build a well. Building a well is actually a slightly more complex endeavor than most things, so I will cover this in a future episode. Let's use constructions and floors, however, to fix the hole that we found earlier. So, as you may remember, this hole was created by destroying the roots of a tree. I can now place a floor tile in here. So click twice in here to say that that's a 1x1 rectangle. And we can say, please take a boulder of shale and create a solid floor in there instead of a hole in the ground. So somebody will slowly, now this is our ether. You might have noticed that they are moving very slowly right now because they are holding a shale boulder. If we go in items, we can take a look at this shale boulder and we can see the weight. The weight is 225, whatever this unit is. This is the Dwarf Fortress weight unit. For comparison, let's look at something else. Let's look, for example, at this pile of logs. The weight of this is just 28. Another example. Let's look at a copper short sword. The weight is just 2. Now, the heavier the thing that you carry is, the slower you will go. Keep that in mind when assigning your dwarves to holding specific things. Also, keep that in mind when creating stockpiles. If all your stockpiles include stone boulders, you will have a lot of dwarves carry around very heavy items all the time, and as a consequence, moving very slowly. Okay, let's unpause and let's watch the dwarf construct this floor, and there it is. We do not have a hole in there anymore, as quickly demonstrated by Sodil, the expedition leader, proudly standing on top of the newly built rough shale block floor. Alright, that was the construction menu. Next up is the stockpile menu. We have used this already into the tutorial. I just want to take a brief look with you at stockpile options. Now, normally to create a new stockpile, you would do this, then click on add, and you would paint a stockpile, click on accept, and this is the stockpile options. Let's remove this stockpile for now because I don't wish to create a new one. What I want to do is modify the existing generic stockpile. From here we can rename it. I can call it general stores, for example. I can repaint, which basically means increasing or decreasing the area. I want it to take all this area. Click to accept, and then after having selected all as the initial designation for the kind of items that can be stored in here, I can click on custom to customize it. One important thing that I would like to do in here is saying something like, you know, stuff like corpses? Well, I want none of that. Refuse? Again, none of that. Stone? Not even one. Wood? No wood, please. Alright, so this leaves us with several types of ammo, animal cages, armor and clothes, bars and blocks, cloth, coins, finished goods, food, and so on and so forth. But these kind of items I would rather not have, maybe because I want another stockpile to have these kind of items somewhere else. Like for example, corpses and refuse are better placed outside because they may produce stink clouds that are obviously not a good choice underground. Alright, so this is the new settings of my general store's stockpile. Next up, we have the zones. Zones are areas you designate where your citizens will work, socialize, rest, or perform specific duties. There are several kinds of zones, which you can see in the panel on the left. Zones are placed much like stockpiles. Unlike stockpiles, multiple zones can overlap, so you can have zones on top of zones on top of zones. Certain zones like bedrooms can be placed several at a time. Just make sure you have the correct furniture placed in the rooms with doors or vertical entries separating each room before you begin. What does this mean? Let's actually make an example. Let's go downstairs. This is our dormitory room, which is actually not a room yet. This is currently just an area we dug underground and has 3 beds in it. We could actually make this into a zone, a recognized zone. For example, a dormitory. So if I click on this, now I get to paint where the dormitory is. This is the zone. And then I click on accept. This is now a recognized area in my fortress. I now have the option, if I want, to add this area to a larger location. For example, this dormitory could be just one part of a complex inn or tavern. Or maybe a hospital. There is another kind of zone, however, that is pretty crucial at the beginning of the game, and I want to do that right now. Let's jump back to the surface. Let's zoom out a little bit, and let's create a pen or pasture. The tooltip says certain livestock need to graze on grass. Assign these animals to a pasture zone. No fencing is needed. So, pen, pasture. Let's designate an area pretty close to our fortress entrance. Click on accept. Now we have the option to select animals to be placed in this pasture zone. They will stay after being led here. So click on this. Okay. Cats and dogs and birds do not need to graze. However, a lamb or a reindeer or a water buffalo or a yak bull, they all need to graze. So with these animals assigned, I can now right-click to close this, unpause, and my dwarves will lead the animals into this zone. Here they are. And they will stay there, and they will graze on grass, which means they will not starve to death. Next up, we have burrows, holding roots, and traffic areas. All of this is pretty advanced stuff, so I'm not gonna cover it right now. This video is already pretty long, and you probably do not need to use any of these to begin in your fortress. I will, however, quickly cover the last one in here, the designate item, because it is part of a quick pro tip that I want to impart on you. So let's go downstairs. Let's look for a second at all these boulders. Let's say we wanted to clean the area up a little bit. There is a trick to it. I can go to zones and create a garbage dump zone. I'm gonna make this garbage dump pretty small. Let's say 2 tiles in here and say accept. Now, every item that I designate to be dumped will be brought in here. If I now click on designate items, there is an icon specifically for designating an item for dumping in a dumping zone. I can click on that. I can either select rectangle or the draw option, this is actually better. You do not really want to make a big rectangle because you could accidentally designate an entire workshop for dumping, which has unforeseen consequences. Now, let's select a few of these for dumping. Then unpause and let's see what happens. The dwarves are streaming by and are saying, well, this boulder goes in the trash. There we are. So all the boulders have been placed in that dumping zone. They also have another icon to them right now, which is this little lock. One thing we can do at this point is come in here again and click on this. Claim is the opposite of forbid. So if I click on this, click on a rectangle and say claim everything, now I've made all these shale boulders accessible in my fortress again. If I want, I can also now go back to zones, click on this dump zone and remove it. And what I achieved is that I moved several shale boulders in a spot that I designated without the need of creating a specific stockpile. This is especially useful if you want to remove unwanted items from a stockpile. And I should actually do that now that I think about it. So let's make another one. Zone, garbage dump. Okay, don't show this again for zones. Let's make a 1 by 1 in here and click on accept. And then back in here and select item for dumping. Let's make sure that we use the draw option. Let's select for dumping these hematite boulders and also this big heavy wood log. Unpause. Right, so now the dwarves have removed that and already replaced those spots in the stockpile with more useful stuff. Again, to finish the entire thing, I could get in here, select the zone, remove the zone because I don't need it anymore. It was a temporary zone. And then I can claim all the items under here just by clicking. And now in here I have walnut wood logs. And that's all good. Oh, wait a second. I was too quick. The hematite boulders were still underway. So again, you have to remember to claim or unforbid those items. Now there's two icons that remain to look at. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because these really open an entire world of possibilities, and that is the military screen, squads. This is the squad menu. Here you can create squads, fill their positions, assign equipment and schedules, and give specific orders. It is recommended that you prepare a squad and get them training as soon as you can. You have no idea what's lurking out there. And last but not least, the world screen. The world. The world created at the beginning of the game is active, and others may take an interest in your outpost as it grows. Stolen artifacts and kidnapped citizens can be recovered by preparing missions from this screen. You can also cause trouble if you like to raid your neighbors. Raids are created by clicking on any site not belonging to your civilization. Alright, this covers almost everything I wanted to do for this episode. We still have one problem to address. One of our assigned managers is not happy. Tozid, the bookkeeper, lacks a meager study. How do we solve that? A study requires at minimum a chair, so that's something that we can do for them. Let's click on this carpenter's workshop, add a new task. Let's look for chair, make a wooden chair. Now let's wait for a dwarf to swing by and craft that chair. Is it you? Looks like we have a walnut wood chair in here. Pretty good. Let's go downstairs and place this chair. So building, furniture, chair. I want this smack here in the middle for now. Wait, no access? Why no access? Oh, I'll tell you why. This chair is probably in transit. I think this is the icon. Yes, if I hover over this, it says, this item is tagged by a task and will not be used by other tasks. This task is probably hauling. Some dwarf has already decided that they will carry this walnut chair somewhere else. So let's actually follow the chair. We can do that by clicking on the item sheet and then clicking on this icon here to follow the item. We can then close this if we want. It says in here, following the walnut wood chair. Let's now unpause and see what happens. Yes, somebody picked that up and they brought it into the stockpile. So that can happen in your fortress. Every time you think, I have an item, why can't I do this? It's probably because that item is already reserved for a specific task. Most of the times that task is hauling that item in a stockpile. So now, back to it. Building, furniture, chair. I want this chair in here. Now we can select the walnut wood chair. Unpause. Install the chair. Perfect. The chair is installed, but a chair is not a study. We need to create a zone for that. I'm sorry, office, not study. So click on office. Now I'm going to say that all this area I consider to be an office. Accept. Now that I have the office, and I can call it Bookkeeper's office. There you go. I can click on this and assign it to my bookkeeper. There you go. Now the bookkeeper has an assigned chair, and look at them. If I click on them, what are they doing? They are updating the stockpile records. If I now check on the nobles and administrators screen, this is in green. It says meager study, needs a meager study, but it's not in red anymore because they do have a study that it's at least meager. And it looks like they were extremely fast. Look in here. Food, 63 items. Drink, 43. Seeds, 36. Now we have accurate counts up to 100 items. And this is also reflected in our stocks tab. And look at this, logs. We have exactly 99 logs. Now I'm tempted to further test the precision of my bookkeeper by chopping trees and creating more logs that they will then not be able to properly account for. Okay, now there's more logs. Let's click again on stocks and look for logs. Yes, look at this. It says roughly 150. And I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this. So, again, how do I do this? In here, I selected the second level of precision. This means everything accurate under 100 items, and then basically only focus on the first 2 digits. Alright, this marks the end of this second episode. Not a lot has moved in this fortress. There is a lot of UI, and there's also a lot of things that I pretty much skipped, because this game is big, is deep, is complex. If you are playing this for the first time, it's gonna take a while until you learn everything. And let me tell you, I've played this on and off for roughly 10 years, and there's a few things that I have maybe done once or twice. Dwarf Fortress is so expansive that you can totally play for hundreds and hundreds of hours and barely touch some features that may be something that someone else likes the best. Anyway, this is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next one. Alla prossima!